Hello everyone, I'm Sibel Edmund's. I'm going to provide some general synopsis of my case. I know some of you are very familiar with my case, but then there are some of you who are somewhat familiar, and we may have some new viewers here, maybe more than a few, who have never heard of my case or my background. So allow me to start with just a short, brief overview of my case. I know it's been a long time. In fact, it has been 16 years since my whistleblowing journey began with the FBI. So bear with me and hopefully we can make this short and sweet. I worked for the FBI in 2001, right after 9/11. I worked for several departments for the FBI's Washington field office. This is in Washington, D.C. I worked for 3 different departments, to be exact. I worked for counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and also I did some work for the criminal division. There are various divisions within the FBI. And even though I started as a language specialist with the FBI, I speak 4 languages, including Farsi and Turkish and Azerbaijani, fairly quickly, within 2 months after I started, they asked me, and these are the special agents that I worked with. Some of them were in Washington, D.C. field office. Some of them were in other field offices, such as Chicago and Patterson office in New Jersey, LA office in California. Pretty soon, these agents asked me to perform not only translations for them, but also actual analysis. This was due to several reasons. The FBI's field offices, they didn't have any Turkish analysts or any analysts from Central Asia, Caucasus region. And I was not planning to be a language specialist. I have a master's degree in public policy. I have degrees in criminal justice and psychology. And I was intimately familiar with the politics in Turkey, in Iran, because I had lived in those countries. So I could perform mainly analysis for a lot of raw intelligence that the agents were gathering on minutely basis from various sources and targets. I also had highest level security clearance because I had access to the most, or what the FBI considered the top classified information. And again, these were from both counterterrorism division and also from the counterintelligence division. So without getting into too many details, I know some of those details I can't get into because of the ultra classified nature of this information. And I have to also emphasize that some of this information, raw intelligence, were justifiably classified, while there were others that should not have been classified in the first place. The only reason they were classified was so that this information would be kept out of the public's eye. And many of this information involved actual criminal operations activities performed, executed by various U.S. agencies, both in the United States and also outside the United States. Within a few months after I started working with the FBI, I came across some very significant information and consequent cover-up of those various categories of information. And unlike what many people believe, I didn't get out of the FBI building, go to some press office and leak documents. I didn't even know it was called whistleblowing. In fact, I decided that it was my obligation, even based on documents I had signed with the FBI, that it was my duty, my obligation under my contract to report these issues to the higher management, which I did. When no actions were taken, not only that, the only actions that were taken involved retaliation against me, and this was mandatory forced polygraph test. In fact, they had a troop of 7-8 agents storming my house and confiscating my home computer, my PC. My husband at the time worked from his home office in our house. They confiscated my husband's computer. I decided that, well, that outlet, that channel was absolutely futile, pointless to pursue. So I went to the United States Congress. Because if you are familiar with US laws and policies, You know that they present these so-called appropriate channels for the whistleblowers, for people who are reporting wrongdoing, go to, and in a safe environment without jeopardizing any classified information, to report whether it's waste, whether it's fraud, whether it's abuse, or in this case, criminal deeds performed against the United States national security and against the international laws. It was at that point that I found out for the first time, really, because at that point in 2002, we didn't have many cases of whistleblowers, that I was labeled, I was called, they referred to me, whether in Congress or IG offices or the attorney offices that I went to, that people like me were called whistleblowers. And it was a name, it was a title that was really unsavory for me, because my reaction was, I am reporting urgent criminal operations, criminal deeds, and subsequent cover-ups by certain U.S. agencies and by certain U.S. officials. Some of these officials were elected representatives. Some of these officials held high-level positions within the executive branch, such as the State Department and Pentagon. And some of these individuals worked for, I call them in-between agencies, not exactly governmental agencies, but entities that worked with the U.S. government, inside the U.S. government, such as RAND Corporation and various think tanks. By mid-March 2002, I was officially, you may call it, a whistleblower. And the retaliation level from the FBI and the Justice Department against me increased tremendously. In fact, by the end of March 2002, they removed my security clearance and they denied access. They denied me access to all these files and the cases I was working on. Eventually, by mid-April 2002, I was terminated. I would call it, I was fired, but because I was a contract employee, they called it termination of contracts without any reason cited. Within 6 months after that, after I was terminated, to be exact, on October 18, 2002, the Justice Department, at the time the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, invoked this thing called executive action called state secrets privilege in my case, which basically said, I can't go to courts, I cannot go and talk about any of the angles or the information involved in my case, and pretty much it is a type of a gag order. And it was a rare executive privilege invoked up until that point within the history of the United States. This law has never passed the Congress or the courts. It's an executive law based on common law that was rarely practiced in the United States. I was one of the first 3 or 4 people in the United States to receive that invocation, the state secrets privilege, which is a severe gag order. The government went further than that. They went to Congress, and this is the Justice Department, in 2002, and they told the congressional offices, both in the Senate and the House, these were from offices from appropriate committees with jurisdiction over the Justice Department, State Department, CIA, basically law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And they told them to cease investigating my case. They told them to basically clean up their computers and make sure they destroy any documents they had obtained during the investigation of my case. There were several offices that actually actively investigated my case. One of them was Senator Leahy, Democrat from Vermont, with the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time. The other one was a Republican, Senator Chuck Grassley. They jointly opened an investigation in my case. They actually summoned people from the FBI and began collecting testimonies. And interestingly, the agents I worked with, those witnesses, they all corroborated my case, because none of these wrongdoings that I had witnessed and I had reported were due to some of the field agents operating. The agents I worked with, counterintelligence, counterterrorism, These were street-level agents, and they were doing their jobs. These deeds were committed from the highest level offices within the FBI, highest level offices in the State Department, and particular divisions within the CIA and the Pentagon. This was the first time that the United States Congress was officially gagged by an executive branch. In fact, constitutionally, it is impossible for the executive branch to issue a gag order on another branch, such as the judiciary or legislative branch. And again, interestingly, these congressional offices, they didn't challenge this illegal, unconstitutional order. They went about implementing it, meaning they ceased making comments on my case to the media, which they had done in the past. They have vouched for my credibility, the credibility of the case, the fact that my case and my allegations were all confirmed by insiders, and these are various senior level agents within the FBI. These congressional offices actually abided by this unconstitutional gag order, and they cleaned up their computers and they destroyed any documents they had obtained in my case, regarding my case, from various witnesses. Not only that, within a year or so after all this, the United States government, the Justice Department, invoked the state secrets privilege for the second time in my case. The state secrets privilege has never been invoked twice on the same person, but in this case, they did. So what did I do? After exhausting the congressional channel, pursuing the congressional channel, after pursuing the executive offices supposedly in charge of receiving these types of wrongdoing reports, such as the Inspector General's office, I began pursuing my case in courts. Well, every single one of my court cases, whether my case filed with the courts under the First and Fourth and Fifth Amendment, or the case under FOIA laws, because my attorneys and we requested documents from the government, and they were obligated to release some of these documents. But they did not. They violated the FOIA laws, and FOIA laws refer to Freedom of Information Act, meaning there are certain documents that people, the public, are entitled to receive. And again, even though they kept citing classification issue, many of these documents were not classified. This time around, the government stepped in and they told the courts that no matter how factual my case, no matter how strong my case, I could not pursue my case in the courts of law. They said the information I knew about, I had witnessed, I had gathered while I was working inside the FBI were so incredibly classified, were so sensitive in nature, that even hearing my date of birth, where I went to school, where I was born, would jeopardize our national security and the classified nature of what I knew about. In fact, under Judge Reggie Walton's court, this is a federal court in Washington, D.C., the government stepped in and asserted that my date of birth was classified and considered state secrets. Where I had attended schools, these included universities and colleges I had attended in the United States, were all classified and they were covered by state secrets privilege. They said where I was born was covered by the state secrets privilege, and the languages, every single one of those that I spoke and I was fluent in, were considered sensitive material, sensitive information, and therefore classified and covered by the state secrets privilege. Of course, I didn't give up, and I kept pursuing the courts. I went to the appellate courts. At this time, the ACLU, because my case had begun receiving some level of publicity, stepped in and they represented me. So we went to the appellate court. Again, it was blocked by the government assertion of the state secrets privilege. And then we took our case, my case, all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. After that one last court channel, meaning the Supreme Court, that channel was exhausted because, again, they were prevented from hearing my case. I had basically exhausted all governmental channels: Congress, the executive branch, and the courts. By 2004, after finding out, despite my degrees in public policy and US politics, I had no idea what was truly the true functioning of the US government. I truly believed in the separation of branches and all those stuff. But with this knowledge, I formed my own organization without registering it as an NGO. And I started gathering other national security whistleblowers who have gone through retaliation. I also started pursuing the fourth state, in this case, the media, and tried to get the media to investigate this case. So much had already been made public by the congressional channels. So much had been made public by other witnesses within government agencies that had come forward and corroborated my allegations. But none of these media channels, and at the time, most of them were mainstream media. There were some alternative medias, or the so-called supposed alternative media outlets out there as well. None of them covered my case except one aspect of it. And that aspect was, here is the victim. Look how badly government retaliated against her. This is what the government does to people who dare blowing the whistle. They lose their jobs, they get to be hooked on polygraph machine, they get to be, basically their lives are destroyed. They wanted to limit the reporting on this case that became known as the most gagged case, the most gagged person. In fact, the ACLU from 2004, after going and searching the entire case histories under the law in the United States history, they came out and they said, I was the most gagged person in the history of this country, pretty much 300 years. But no, the media didn't want to have anything to do with why this was the case. Why someone who worked with the FBI, in the FBI, less than a year, would become the most gagged person. What kind of information did she report, did she come across that the government is so afraid of? Not a single media outlet pursued that line of inquiry or that line of investigation. By 2007, there I was. All my court cases were over. There was no sign of having any congressional hearing because Congress was officially gagged on my case. And I had come to this realization that we as a nation did not even have a real media, a real independent media outlet, not even one in our nation. Can you believe that? It was around this time, the end of year 2007, beginning of 2008, that I decided to publish a list, a web page, with a bunch of pictures of various people. I call this my state secrets gallery. I was gagged from speaking and naming any individuals involved in my case. I was gagged officially to talk about any information I had come across that was criminal in nature, because they classified it, they have the power to classify it. But I was not gagged from publishing pictures. So I published this list with the pictures of 24 or so US officials. Some of them from the executive branch, some of them from the Congress, these were the elected representatives, and some of them from these in-between agencies. If you look at this state secrets privilege list, you'll see that it is divided based on 3 categories. At the top, you see the names and the pictures, and I did not name them. Other volunteers, researchers, and activists actually went out and found names to list and put out with the pictures. All I could do at that point was putting out pictures, being under this gag order. So you see the first category, and these are the executive branch officials who were directly involved in my case, in those criminal operations that I blew the whistle on. And if you scroll down, you would see the legislative branch, and you see these US representatives, the elected officials. And as you can see, there are Democrats and there are Republicans. Same with the ones above. And if you keep scrolling down, you come to the third category. And those are the ones who are in between governmental and non-governmental agencies. Now let's go back to this list again, and let's go back to second category. I mean, you see individuals like Tom Lantis. Of course, you see Dennis Hastert there. There is a box there with a question mark. There is no picture there. Today, I want to talk about who this box belonged to.